So this week we have what is probably the biggest astrology news of the year. And I'm going to be talking you through it. I'm going to be talking about it with someone who is going to help you do it in a soulful way. More about that in a minute, but it's all in this week's Mainly Moonology podcast. So this week we have a massive astrological shift happening, and I happen to have with me one of the world's leading lights when it comes to working with your soul and basically tuning into living a spiritual life, and that is the wonderful Rebecca Campbell. So Miss Beck, welcome to the show.
Oh, I am so excited to hear about the astrology this week.
Okay, I've told Rebecca we're going to talk about the astrology and then I'm going to get her thoughts on it. So it's all going to be off the top of her head. Let me just tell you, Rebecca is a transformational author, mystic, artist, speaker, teacher, and also a podcaster who supports people to connect with their soul. She's the founder of the Inner Temple Mystery School, the Oracle Card Reader Certification, and her mission is to weave the sacred back into everyday life. And by the way, she's doing that with 2 children under the age of, 5 are they? How old?
Oh my God, yeah, Sonny's
now.
Well, 5 and almost 2.
Right. Her books include Rise Sister Rise, Light is the New Black, and she's amazing. So, Rebecca, thanks for being here.
Yeah, so good.
And I will just say, Rebecca has a book coming out in 2 days, which I will tell you more about later, which is called Your Soul Had a Dream, Your Life is It. But before we get to that, Rebecca, let me tell you what's happening this week. And it's interesting for Rebecca because it's actually basically what's going to be on the chart of her new book.
And it's so interesting because this book has had 4 birth dates, and finally the final one, it's a Scorpio, 19th
right. And
November.
Okay.
What's in the stars?
So basically, just to really sum up that, because we Beck and I talked about it a little bit before we hit record, the publication date for her book has changed. This is the 4th time, I think you just said. Yeah. And so we were talking about this, and I said, and she actually thought of it as well, as an astrologer, when your book comes out, it's born and it gets a birth chart. Everything we do has a birth chart. So this book obviously wanted to be a Scorpio, which is not surprising because it's very much about transformation, and that's probably the key word for Scorpio. The other thing that occurs to me when I look at the astrology for this week is that this week we have lots of really interesting aspects. We have the Sun opposite Uranus, so the week's going to start off a little bit chaotic, a little bit crazy. Egos might be getting put out of joint. On the 18th, we have Mercury opposite Jupiter, which is beautiful, actually really good if you're launching a book, because Mercury is the planet of communications, also good for conversations, emails. So if you've got anything really important to say, try and say it on the 17th, because you'll be tapping into that Mercury Jupiter energy on the 18th. Then we get on the 19th, we're getting the Sun trining Neptune, which is really beautiful. It's great for meditation. It's really good for anything mystical or numinous, which is actually publication day for Rebecca's new book. And we get Mercury trining Chiron, so very healing. So just to quickly sum up those first few days of the week again for you, it could start off a bit chaotic, but then everything shifts and it becomes optimistic and mystical and healing. So that takes us up to November 19th, the day of publication, actually, as it happens. And November the 19th is the day when finally, after absolutely like a couple of years of flip-flopping backwards and forwards, Pluto is finally going to change signs for real this time and move into Aquarius. And actually, I haven't recorded the interview yet, but I'm pretty sure that by the time this one comes out, you will have heard last week one of the world's greatest astrologers, Stephen Forrest, and I talking about Pluto into Aquarius. So I'm not going to dive really deeply into it this week because hopefully I did it last week by the time you hear this. But in a nutshell, it's the start of a new era. So one thing that I think is really great for you, Beck, as you're launching this book this week, is that it's happening after this shift, because we're going into a new era. So it's really good that your book is going to have this new era energy on it. But I think as well to say about Pluto shifting signs, I mean, there's so much that it means for society, for the world, for the human race. And I've covered that in other places, and I will have covered it last week with Stephen Forrest, hopefully. But on a really personal level, when a planet changes signs, assuming you use something like whole sign houses or equal houses, it will actually shift from one part of your chart to another. And Pluto energy is very much about the life, death, and rebirth cycle. It's about throwing out the dead wood in your life. It's about getting rid of toxicity. It's about power struggles and how nobody ever wins a power struggle, it just ends up being a fight to the death. So it's about how can I look for the win-win situation? How can I be altruistic and so on? So what I was thinking, Beck, is since this is the energy for this week, how can we talk to you about your work with the soul and but about life, death, and rebirth, and about going through massive life changes? I know in your book you talk about the dark nights, plural, of the soul, very, very Plutonic construct. So I thought maybe we could sort of talk about a few of these things just so people get their brains thinking about these sorts of energies, which are going to be so prevalent this week. So rather than leaving it open-ended and you just thinking, oh my God, what am I meant to say? Let's start by talking about dark nights of the soul and what that means. And for anyone listening who sort of feels like they've been through a really rough time and they've, had the life, death, and rebirth metaphorically in their life, what can you tell us about that, and what are we going to find in your book about that?
Yeah, for sure. So I think that the dark nights of the soul tend to happen. It's like the death. It's the spiritual death. It's like where we are really brought to the fire, our feet on the fire.
Can I just say, very Pluto?
Yes, totally. Well, I've just been through a big period personally of like Pluto square, Pluto transit, all those like midlife. When I wrote this book, I was like there.
Okay.
But really what I've started tracking in the awakening process is we tend to like have these different stages, and everyone's journey is completely different. But I have noticed that it does tend to begin with like a ascent. So it's kind of like, you're kind of drawn to the stars, the moon, the cosmos, and all of that, angels, guides, da, 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 da. And we have like a mind awakening where we're like, oh my God, whoa, I never even could see this before. How amazing is this world? A heart awakening, maybe through like loss of a loved one or loss of a job or that kind of thing. And sometimes a body awakening, which you might experience through like a Kundalini awakening, a Kundalini Shakti awakening, which is the rising of the spiritual energy. But these stages of the awakening journey are like an upward expanse. It's like it's creating more space in our body for our soul to come more fully in.
Does it feel good? I mean, it sounds good.
Yeah, it tends to like, obviously there's expansion, contractions, like there's always some form of contraction, but the ascent tends to be good. It's like the high of the spiritual journey, it's a bit more in like ecstatic, intoxicating, amazing, that kind of thing. Fascinating.
And it's sort of that moment when you realize, wow, there's more to life than I thought.
Exactly. And like with that obviously comes, ooh, like, what do I do about this life that I've consciously created? So it's not all just like candy and fairy floss, but it tends to be more in that expansive, amazing, inspiring thread. Then we enter a phase that I call the dark nights of the soul. And many mystics have spoken about this. And this is, I call it like the descent. And so it's as if those earlier stages of awakening have created space for our soul to come more fully in. And then we're like hurtled into our childhood, hurtled into our ancestral trauma, humanity, the earth, and all the separation and disconnection that is there. And I believe that humanity as a whole is in many, like most of us are going through some kind of collective dark night of the soul. And I think it is an invitation for us to return to ourselves, return to each other, and return to the earth as well. You know, we are like, we know that we're facing so many things on the world, from like ecocide, genocide, like and we're seeing it bombarded every single day. And what I'm noticing is that, you know, all this talk of like a new earth, for me, it's actually about a new humanity rather than a new earth, and that we're collectively being called to mend what's been severed and see how, you know, systems are crashing, like looking at people that we've held up on a pedestal, from like gurus to spiritual teachers to celebrities. Like there's like a leveling out that's happening because we've like separated ourselves from this genuine oneness. Not oneness as in like me and the angels, but like literally all of life. So that's what I see happening now. I think the opportunity of the dark nights of the soul is that we can find our ground. There's a humbleness that comes, and we're often urged to see the sacred that's right in front of us, rather than, you know, kind of coming out of our body and kind of just like swimming around with the angels.
Amazing. So anyone who's listening, you know, for one thing, this is so Pluto. Pluto is all about life, death, and rebirth, which is really kind of what we're talking about here. So it's the perfect time, of course, naturally, of course it aligns, but it's the perfect time to talk about this. But, you know, for anyone who's listening, how do they know if they're going through the dark nights of the soul? And tell us about, I mean, I know it's in your book, so I know the answer, but tell us why you said dark nights, plural.
Okay, so it's dark nights because contrary to what we would all wish when we're going through it, is that it is never one night.
Yeah.
It's like, you know, healing has a mysterious timing to it. And yeah, those periods of transformation, in many cases, excruciating. They crack us open and it seems like chaos, like there's no order to it. But you know, we've all probably been through something where, through living enough years or months after, we can like get a glimpse back and be like, whoa, oh my gosh, maybe I wouldn't choose to live through it again, but I can see how I have changed and transformed through it, and I wouldn't have had I not been through that experience.
And it doesn't have to be things like death of a loved one
No.
or divorce or loss of job. Because I know you say you've been through your own dark nights of the soul in the last couple of years. And I know you haven't been through any of those, because I know you well
No.
enough to know you haven't lost your job, you haven't got divorced. And as far as I'm aware, you haven't lost anyone in, you know, very close to you in particular in the last, say, 3 or 4 years. So talk about that a little bit, how it doesn't have to be like the
Yeah,
headline news.
it could be the ending of a friendship. I think that is one of the most unspoken about griefs that we go through, particularly in this day and age, you know, when communication is just so rampant. It can be through, like, I became a mom, so that is huge transformation, hormonally, physically, like just, you know, day-to-day life. I know you're on the other side of motherhood, Yas, with your son. You know, I can't believe how big he is, you know,
Now
and
an
that's like
adult.
a change of role, you know, and it's amazing. But, you know, yeah, so it can be so multi-layered. Aging parents, you know,
Yeah.
moving of houses, of city. Like, we've been through COVID where
Yeah.
we were isolated from each other.
Yeah.
Childhood traumas coming up. Just literally experiencing grief and rage that you don't understand what it is. Maybe it's collective, maybe it's ancestral, and
Yeah.
feeling really confused by it. It can
Yeah.
be all these things.
And just to bring it back to the astrology for this week, you know, one of the words that Rebecca used was transformation, and that is really probably the number one key word for Pluto, which is so energized this week. And just to mention, with Pluto, with planetary activity, when a planet changes signs, that's when we feel it the most, when it moves in or out of a sign. So we will. So just say someone's listening to this and thinking, okay, well, I'm ready to shed the past. I've had the dark nights, or I can feel the dark nights coming. Excuse me. What do you suggest to people that they can do to try and, live it authentically, live it consciously? Because I know when I'm in absolute, SHIT-ville, it can be the time where you least want to, when you're in the middle of a dark night of the soul, it's not when you definitely feel your most spiritual. Like if you believe Instagram, yes, all these people go through these dark nights of the soul and are like, I am a warrior rising, but not everybody can be a warrior in the middle of the dark night. So what do you
No, not at all. But here's the thing, like the Dark Nights of the Soul, it was originally one of the first people that spoke about it was a mystic called St. John of the Cross. And he referred to this text that's actually anonymous. No one knows who wrote it, which is called The Cloud of Unknowing. And he spoke about it as in like previously in earlier stages of awakening, I was like intimate with God, the divine, it was just like me and like I had like a hotline and, it was amazing. It was so great. It was like being in love, like that honeymoon period of when you're in a relationship. And then all of a sudden there's this cloud of unknowing between me and my beloved is what it says. And that's kind of like, I guess it's kind of like in a relationship when, honeymoon period's over a little bit. And so I think that the invitation when we are in the dark nights of the soul, first of all, like what I see a lot of people doing is like, oh, that spiritual tool doesn't work anymore. And so that's wrong. And now this is right, in this divisive kind of way. But I think the thing is everyone has their own guidance that they're being called to do. What I would recommend for anyone going through a dark night of the soul, take it back to the body. What does your body want? If you're feeling grief, if you're feeling anger, if you're feeling frustration, if you're feeling numbness, move your body, because it's often down to the cells. It's often in the soma of the body that it wants to process something through. So that's what I'd recommend. And you can do that through, if you're up for it, doing some kind of like intuitive, like, dance movement, which basically means move your body however it wants to move, put on some music, whatever type of music you want. You might want to roll around on the ground. You might want to like rage it out to Sia or something like that. That's my favorite music to dance to, Sia. Titanium, love that track. Or maybe you just want to walk in nature, but like don't stop moving your body when you're feeling like, because the dark night, it's the descent and you can kind of like cave in during it. But there is like, if you liken it to, that analogy of the butterfly, where, it's in that chrysalis. And if you were to open it before the transformation has happened, it would just be organs and gunk and you'd miss it entirely. But there's something happening. There's alchemy, there's transformation in the making. It's just like, and this is why it's called nights. It's really freaking annoying because we want it to be over when we want it to be over. But if that caterpillar, decided to jump ship, like it would be pretty gross.
Yeah, that's a great analogy, actually. Okay, all right. Well, I love that. So before we move on to talking a bit about your book, I just want to talk about the moon.
Where's the moon?
So we've just had the full moon at the time this podcast will go out. So we're going to be in the waning cycle, which is the shedding. So talk to me about shedding. I mean, talk to me about the soul. Does the soul come in with stuff from past lifetimes we need to shed? How do we shed? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, well, I believe that the soul chooses the body, which means it chooses, the family system. It chooses the ancestral line. It chooses it all. And so, often we can, that was my son who just walked in. Often we can, often we can over spiritualize and be like, oh, it's all karmic past life stuff. And it might be, but it's probably past lives and ancestral, because I think we choose like the right match or family system or whatever. Regarding, the waning, it's like the surrender. In order for transformation to happen, something needs to end. In order, there's that some beautiful poetry, and I've actually written a lot of it in my book, actually, of like the people think that the darkness is the end, but it's actually the beginning. So it's like what we think is the end of the road is also the womb, and if we, in our society, we've not been taught to honor endings. Like we're talking about friendship endings before, and if we're not able to be witnessed in our ending or witness ourselves or acknowledge it ourselves, and we can do it in really simple ways, but if we gloss over because we're trying to like race on to the next thing, then part of our energy gets stuck there in the past. And so it's like, how can we take a breath and like let this end? Like, all your beautiful full moon type practices. It's like fully be there before you rush on to the new moon.
Yeah. So actually, one more question. Do you work with the moon? I mean, I kind of know you do, but tell us about how you work with the moon with your soul work, because that I think
for sure.
is really interesting for people.
It's really interesting. I do find with astrology and the moon, I find myself doing ritual at the perfect time, and I don't actually plan it. Sometimes I know it's like, I always know that it's a full moon, but I'll find myself spontaneously going in. And for me, that's just so amazing, because it's like, we know, and like I'll often plan a full moon ceremony, which often includes like either lighting a fire, like sometimes it's not outside like an actual fire, it'll just be like in my living room, and but I'll catch myself burning something. So I'm like doing a ritual without planning on doing a ritual,
Yeah, that's beautiful. So, okay, so I want to talk a bit about this book. Okay, so one thing, can I ask the hard question first, and then we'll get to some easy
go for
questions?
it.
One thing I thought when I saw this title was, wow, if somebody's going through a really rough time, it's going to confront them. So what do you say to that, to someone who's like, sees that and goes, but how could this be my dream? It's like a nightmare.
Well, I guess it's like a bigger perspective of like our soul chose to be here now for whatever reason. And I don't think that our soul chose to be here just to have a great time. It might be part of it, but that's not how we grow, So yeah. And through my experience, what I've seen is that even though it's like, it is confronting the human experience, like the grief and the love, the ecstasy and the agony, like, but you can't have the ecstasy without also experiencing the opposite. Like this is part of the human experience.
Yeah. No, I like that. I love that answer. So, in the very beginnings of the book, you talk about this mystical experience you had. And if I'm not mistaken, I think I said this to you on email the other day, you told me about a little bit about that experience once when we were having lunch.
Yeah.
At
they
my
were at dinner
house.
at your place with your mom.
Yes, or
and my
dinner.
parents.
And you were saying, for those of you who are watching on YouTube or Facebook and you can see it, those of you who are listening, I'm sort of waving around. You talked about sort of your body being thrown around like this. Is that what we were talking about? And
yeah.
tell us about
it was
because it
soon
really
after.
led to the book.
Yeah, literally. Yeah. Yep, for sure. And even if anyone's watching, behind me, I've got a piece of art, which is a card from my Starseed Oracle. The title is Fall Into My Arms, is the card. And the first chapter in the book is called Fall Into My Arms. And that's a depiction of the mystical experience. Yeah.
So what do you think was happening? You'd just done a week of chanting. So for me, what happened was that you did a week of chanting and then you were just thrown wide open. But what do you think happened that led you into that?
Yeah, I think that the power of the chant, of mantra, of really just singing the name and singing these literally primordial sounds of the creation of the universe. I think what I tapped into was I saw the gates of life, like the journey that the soul takes to be here through the first breath and exhaling the last. I saw our connection through our ancestors all the way back to the original mother. And so it was like going into literally death and rebirth, literally the primordial waters of the earth and the primordial waters of the mother. We all, the two initiations that we all share are birth and death. They're the only things that every single one of us has in common. We all go through those portals, and it's the greatest mystery there is. So yeah, very deep.
So I remember when you told me about it, and, there were other people at the table. There was, my husband, your husband, I believe your mum and dad were there. Louis was probably at the table, even though he would have been about 8 or something at the time. And I remember you told me about it, and I thought, oh, that sounds interesting. But it must have been like shocking to you. Like, how did you feel? And also, can I ask you, I haven't finished the book yet, so I don't know if it's in there, but these gates of life that I've read you referring to, what are these gates of life? And again, very Pluto stuff, very, very Pluto is about, as I've said, beginnings, endings, it's very much apt for this week. So, I mean, how did you feel, being a regular girl from Australia, and suddenly you're looking at the gates of life and your body is being thrown around by this energy? I mean, how did you feel and what did it look like? And I'm sorry, Beck, I just wanted to say one thing before we go any further. Listen to what she says and listen to her deep authenticity, if I may talk about you as if you're not here. Beck freed me, because the way she talks from her soul is so authentic. And I think at some point, Hey House actually sent me something you had done as a good example of how to do something. And I just remember watching you on this video and thinking, God, she's just talking from her soul, So listen to what Beck says now. Tell us about this experience. And
well, yeah, I mean, it was twofold. One, obviously, like, it was completely unexpected and far out and not something I was like trying to make happen. But I knew the moment as I stepped into the circle, I knew something was about to happen and that my soul was literally going to go deeper than before. Like it was like it had chosen it. And I knew something was going to happen. It was also not just an experience that happened to me. Like it was felt by the entire class. And yeah, how I felt was it was the most intimate, sensual, deeply nourishing, transformative, healing experience of my life. And, it's why it took I obviously shared it with a couple of friends. But finding words, and this is what happens with mystical experiences, which I do believe we all have in some capacity. They're ineffable because we enter into a state of awe. And when we try and wrap words around, it's like, oh, it's not like, because it's so energetic, it's so deep. It's like chanting, right? It's not about the way your voice sounds. It's not about singing in front of people. It's about really offering up the chant as nectar to your soul, to your heart, to your cells, and then tapping into that chant as if it exists in the field and has existed in the field forever. And you tap into the power and beauty of the millions of people who have chanted that chant thousands and thousands and thousands of times. Like these are the mysteries. So that's what the experience felt like. It was incredible. And it was energetic and cellular. It was like receiving codes. And that one experience has been teaching me ever since. Like I'm still receiving wisdom from that experience, but not wisdom as in, oh, this is the next line of the book. It's like, I'm not even talking my book. Like it's not wisdom like linear at all. It's like cellular, like bringing it into matter, into form. But yeah, like kind of grounding vibration in some way. Yeah.
Right. And then, at the end of it, I suppose you got on the tube and went home.
Yeah.
Like, how do you integrate that?
Well, yeah, it took a long time, and it really did spur on. I had several very physical Kundalini Shakti experiences that followed from that. It was like that was the activation, and it continued from there. And interestingly, like Craig, my husband, who's also a guy from Australia, who at that moment was literally he was literally working in a bank still. Yeah, he ended up having a spiritual awakening of his own when he got back from cricket one night. I think we told you about that. But oh my God, like this all happened within the same month. So it was really unbelievable, and yet it happened.
So with all of this, what do you think your job is here, your purpose is here with all of this to tell us? Like, what are you helping us to understand?
Well, I was reflecting on that just before, actually. And like, it was like, yeah, why share these experiences? And I think the reason, I remember after I had that experience, I was still literally, I was coming back, and my teacher, Nikki Slade, she said to the class, now I want you to give Rebecca space as we do the closing chant. But what I want you to know is that if we lived in a different culture and time, we would revere this experience. It would be like, we'd be literally like feeding Rebecca grapes and, like being like, what do you need? Like treating me like a little newborn, you know what I mean? Like, but we live in a different age. But what we've just experienced together was very auspicious and very sacred. And I know with me on my spiritual journey, several things have happened along my journey, and I felt very alone in them. And sometimes I think it's easy to feel like you're going a bit crazy because it's not revered, where compared to, say, in India and other places like that, or understood. And so I do feel passionate about us sharing our notes from the journey, not from a place of like, oh, look what happened to me, or not from a place of, the step one is this, step two is this, because everyone's journey is definitely unique. But I think that a lot of things happen, particularly for women, like postpartum is a perfect example, where you go through such a huge initiation. I know with me, with birth, like I really tapped into the power and grief and rage of my ancestors, everything that had happened down the female line. Now, you could see that as like, whoa, she's a bit like, what's happening to her? Like, she's not really coping being a new mom. Or you could be like, whoa, she has been through a huge transformation, and wow, she is tapping into something very powerful. And I think in the West, we're so behind in understanding that. And that's why I think it's really important that we share our stories, because we are going through a rebirth and we have to say yes to it if we want it. And we are all connected. And so what is happening to one, we do feel too. And so many of us are experiencing things collectively, but like analyzing it separately.
Yeah. I mean, I kind of feel like when I hear you talking about that and how everyone's going through stuff as well, I feel like, gosh, maybe the pandemic was a sort of a gestation period and we all just had that time out, and now everybody's kind of, I just wanted to refer back to a couple of things. So one is just again regarding Pluto this week being so energized, it really reminds me of one of your kind of favorite sayings, which is anything inauthentic will not survive. And that's very much in the ethers this week. And also with the waning moon, another thing that Rebecca says a lot is about what's rising up and what's falling away, and this is very much about a falling away. We're going to do a card in a minute for everybody who wants one, but before we do that, I just want to just get really sort of back down to earth here and ask you, so you live in Glastonbury, which is for anyone who doesn't know Glastonbury, it's like the spiritual home of England, I would say. It's a bit like Sedona, the Sedona of England, or the Byron Bay of England. Would you agree with that?
Yeah.
Yeah. So, okay, so that's kind of a cosmic place to live. But I also know, you're married with these 2 young kids. So for anyone who's out there, listening to this, how do you find, I mean, you must get asked this all the time. And yes, it's true. I probably would ask Craig the same question. But how do you find being, a mom and getting the kids to school or picking them up or this or that or making dinner or having a date night or all those sort of really down-to-earth practicalities, having a takeaway dinner in front of the TV? How do you balance that with this sort of super-duper mystical side of yourself?
Well, if you look at my chart, you'd understand, because I'm Virgo and I've got a lot of Scorpio, but I've got Aries moon as well.
You have really strong Scorpio energy.
I do, yeah. Venus in Scorpio too. My son has Venus in Scorpio. Yeah, I mean, I grew up in a really normal family and I've always had a really strong work ethic. So yeah, I don't know. I just kind of have always been here on a mission and, just put one foot in front of the other. I'm actually really practical. Like, yeah, with like, it's like in all my books, there's always like, you're going deep, but then it's like, so what does this mean for you? What are you going to do with it? So yeah, but I think motherhood more than anything has like completely changed my spiritual practices. In that, like, before I thought it was like so woven into my life, but I look now and it's like, oh my God, no, it's still like compartmentalized. And so now I just need to like find ways to like actually have it stitched in. Like, for example, I'll go walking with my son and we like connect him with the spirit of the flowers or whatever. Or like he picks up lucky charms or stones or whatever, and we make an altar on the kitchen table. So it's just like, really real stuff. Yeah.
Okay, amazing. All right. And before we do the card, just give us one good reason. Why should anyone who's listening to this, who's a bit thinking, oh, this sounds good, why should they read Your Soul Had a Dream, Your Life Is It? What are they going to get?
Well, it's super comforting and it will just support you in connecting in with the voice of your soul. Yeah, it'll help you feel held.
All right, beautiful. So let us do a card. Why don't we use one of your decks?
A message from the Moonology Oracle.
And we'll make this card for anyone who's going through a rough time right now, be it a mildly rough time or a dark nights of the soul period. Mm-hmm. It's going to be a message. Which deck are you going to use, Beck?
I'm going to use Rose because I got it right here. The Rose Oracle it is. And it's the rose thread, inner call, soul-led, the mystic living courageously. So yeah, this is like really about like being like connecting in with that part of you that knows, part of you where maybe you wake up at 3 a.m. And you're like, oh God, I'm being called to do this. Oh no, I'm not. I'll just pretend I'm not. It's like answering that, listening to that. Yeah. But just like little baby steps, like what's the next step? You don't have to, know every single step along the way.
Cool. All right. Well, that is it. Thank you so much, Rebecca Campbell. So tell us where we can find you on the internet.
Yeah, sure. I'm at RebeccaCampbell.me and Instagram's RebeccaCampbell_author.
And the book is out this week.
Yep.
And if you're interested, buy it now. You'll be doing Rebecca a favor because the algorithm loves it when you buy it before it comes out. And I'm betting my bottom dollar that if they go to your website, there'll be a whole lot of goodies that people can
Yes, get. Totally. Yeah, you'll get a 2-hour workshop, a playlist, and a guided journal. Yeah.
So RebeccaCampbell.me, you'll find all the goodies. Order it before it comes out. And it's a brilliant book. I'm absolutely loving it. And it's actually, like you say, it's very comforting and very gentle. I thought it was going to be a bit scary, and it's not at all. It's very gentle.
Thanks, honey.
All right. Thank you so much, Rebecca.
Thanks, babe.